Hello everybody and welcome back to my sunroom here in East Tennessee. My gorgeous NOID Cattleya that my friend Patrick gave me is in full bloom. I showed it last month in my bloom tour video when it was just starting to bloom, and here it is in full bloom with 5 spikes and 25 blooms. This Cattleya is unique, and taking care of it is slightly different than my other Cattleyas. It is a very large plant. It's about 2.5 feet tall. And when it blooms, it needs to be staked up so that you get the best show of the blooms. So I thought I would go through a care tutorial on this plant, and I hope it helps you all. I grow this Cattleya and all of my Cattleyas in New Zealand spag moss from my sponsor, the Orchid Supply Store. It's spring, yay for spring, and it's a great time to restock your orchid supplies. The Orchid Supply Store has everything you need for your orchids and your plants. And when you place an order, use my coupon code AMY for a 12% viewers discount, and there is free shipping in the US. Let me give you a brief background on this plant. I've grown this plant for 3 years, and it's the 3rd time that it's bloomed for me. The first year I had 1 spike. It was much smaller than it is now. I had 1 spike with 5 blooms, and the spike was not so long. I didn't even have to stake it up. Then last year, the 2nd time that it bloomed, I had 10 blooms. I had 2 spikes and 10 blooms. Well, the spikes grew really tall, like what you see here, and overnight they grew to the point that they actually bent over. And so when one of these spikes bends over, it pretty much ruins the spike. It ruins from the place where the spike bends on up. So it kind of ruined the look of the blooms. So what I've done, as you see, I have pinned this thing and tied it back with raffia, with little black pins, anything, so that it stays straight up on these stakes. That is very important when you have a Cattleya like this, so that you get the best blooms and so the blooms don't bend or break. So I have pretty much staked this up meticulously this year, and I've got a gorgeous bloom show. And let's go over light requirements for my Cattleyas. This shelf right here is where that plant normally lives. When it comes out of bloom, I don't know. I'm going to have to do some moving around. But as you see, this is a western facing window, and this is where all of my Cattleyas live. My huge Hawaiian Cattleya has her own halo LED light, or the canes grow sideways and not upright. So your Hawaiian fluffy Cattleyas, they need even brighter light than other Cattleyas do. The ones that I grow here get a little bit of supplemental light. As you see, I've got some halo LED lights attached to the bottom of this shelf. Fall and the winter, that's when they need the supplemental light. Usually in the spring and the summer, I can just about turn those off. But you can see how much light they get. They get bright western facing light. And I've noticed the mistake that some growers make. When they first start growing orchids, they usually grow Phalaenopsis orchids. And then they think, okay, I want to go ahead and try something else. I want to branch out. And so then they get a Cattleya, and they put it in the same type light that the phals are in, and that just doesn't work. The Phalaenopsis orchids, they just don't require as much light to bloom and do really, really well as the Cattleyas. They do require more light. So you can see here how I have mine set up. These are eastern facing windows in my sunroom with a sheer curtain. Western facing windows, no sheer curtain. So that kind of gives you a guideline. And temperatures. The general temperature guidelines for Cattleyas is between 55 to 85 degrees Celsius. My sunroom doesn't normally get below 62 degrees even in the winter, and then it normally reaches about 85, that's about right, in the summer. So mine do really well with those temperature ranges. And a little hint that I'm going to give you all. You'll notice that these back here aren't blooming yet. When these bloom, I bring them into my house in a western-facing window where it's a little bit cooler than it is back in my sunroom in the spring. So here's an example of that. This is my gorgeous GCT Lawless Gloriana, and she is starting to bloom. And I've brought her back here in my western-facing window in my dining room. And this is usually where that other NOID Cattleya is while it blooms as well. Normally it stays a constant 71 degrees in my house, whereas in my sunroom, even in the spring, it can get up to 80 degrees back there rather quickly. And it just makes my blooms last a little bit longer, and I get to enjoy them in my house. Another thing to consider while your Cattleyas are in bloom is how often you water them. Normally when they're not in bud and bloom, I water them in moss about once a week. They don't require any more than that, and I kind of like for the moss to dry out a little bit between waterings because it does make the moss last longer. And these are Cattleyas, so when they're not budding and blooming, they don't require quite as much moisture as when they're budding and blooming. However, when they start budding and blooming, I probably water them every 4 or 5 days rather than every 7 days. The rule of thumb is when an orchid is blooming, it just requires more water. So I've noticed that my blooms last longer when I water them more often. The plant just looks better after it stops blooming as well. So I believe that both for the plant and for the blooms, it is better to water them a little bit more often than my usual once a week schedule. And as far as fertilizing them is concerned, it's pretty easy. I fertilize with MSU, orchid fertilizer, and I use about half of the recommended dosage of that on my Cattleyas every other time that I water them. So that's about 250 parts per million every other time I water. And they don't need more than that. Mine stay green, they stay lush, and they grow really well, and they bloom really well with just that much fertilizer. I don't like to fertilize my orchids that are in moss much higher than that. They just don't need it because the moss retains moisture and it retains nutrients. And as I end this video today, we will just take a glimpse of the gorgeous colors in my Lawless Gloriana. I've had this plant for 22 years in my collection. Oh my goodness, she's just so pretty. So I would love to say the blessing over you, your families, and your plants. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn His face towards you and give you peace. You all, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you next time.